Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regularly scheduled Board of Directors meeting for Marin Water on April 1st, 2025. Terry, if I could please have a roll call.
Good evening. Vice President Jed Smith.
Here.
Director Ranjiv Kush.
Here.
Director Diana Mayer.
Here.
President Matt Sampson.
Here.
And currently not present is Director Larry Russell.
Great. Do we have any public comments on the adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
Could I have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Roll call, please.
Vice President Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush.
Aye.
Director Mayer.
Aye.
President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Terry, do we have any public comment on closed session items?
There are none.
Great. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn to closed session.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome back. We've convened from closed session at 6:30 with no reportable action. And that will go ahead and move to public comments on non-agenda matters.
There are none.
Great.
Oh, I apologize. Someone rose their hand, 1402. Oh, thank you. I have a couple of people. The first one is 1402.
Yeah, James Holmes, Larkspur. This is the time, I think, for comment for matters not on the general agenda, as opposed to the closed agenda. But if I'm wrong, let me know. Recent press reports. I'm sorry.
Can you please speak up, Mr. Holmes?
Yeah. Recent press reports reinforce the validity of my previously expressed concerns that the Sonoma pipeline could leave us at the mercy of Sonoma County agencies. There have been 3 reports in the Marin Independent Journal, and I will just cite them briefly and will be happy to provide more details to staff if desired to look them up. One is in the Marin IJ 318 Marin Voice. It says, hopefully, the contract with Sonoma County will be lived up to, but Marin will be one of several subcontractors dependent on that water. Our group's concern is that in the event of a multi-year drought like the one we just experienced, Sonoma Water may decide it can't send Marin what it needs. It is unclear what happens in that scenario. That's a big problem. Indeed, even more concerning is a contingency that I wasn't aware of and didn't recall being considered in the deliberations about the pipeline decision. Nobody knows the effect of the decrease in water supply to the Eel River that will happen when the Potter Dam is taken out, but there are at least 2 very worthwhile Marin IJ articles regarding it. One is Monday, March 24th, 2023, and the other is it was 320. It was headlined, Water Diversion Raises Concern About Supply, and among other things, it says that it will cut out a process that has supplied through a tunnel carrying Eel River water through the mountains, a crucial portion of the Russian River's annual flows, which supplies Sonoma and Marin counties. And the other article, among other things, says, residents and some elected officials are concerned that the project will spark the potential loss of water river from the Eel River to the Russian River that individuals from Mendocino, Sonoma, and Marin counties have relied on for more than 100 years. So please, the politicians who organized this diversion seem to see it's fine, but a lot of other folks are concerned about it. So please be aware of this, and please take it into consideration and possibly reconsider the pipeline decision in light of these additional contingencies that could really jeopardize us. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect.
Hi, Careful.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here to ask you to reconsider the pipeline project Pater 3, which would divert 4,750 acre-feet of water out of Russian River's sensitive habitat. As a resident, I of course welcome and thank you for your goal to secure the drinking water supply for Marin residents, even during droughts. But there are clearly more 21st century approaches that are less cost-intensive and more environmentally friendly. And the more I learn about the pipeline, the more it becomes clear that Pipeline 3 makes no sense. We talked about that last week. And when we are honest, this is not about securing necessary drinking water, but this is all for maintaining the excessive water use of just a few consumers or super users that use 40% of Marin drinking water for their lawns and pools. It's more about revenue, it feels. I also want to comment on the fact that you want to raise the 405 million that this will eventually cost, plus an annual 3 million for maintenance for this pipeline project by hiking the rates for the consumers. And then, as I learned during the last meeting, the project will eventually increase insurance costs and baseline costs and so on as well. People in this country already pay top prices compared to what is the average water cost in this nation. And on top of this, Marin country's people pay exuberant sewer costs that are elegantly folded into their extremely high taxes. I would like to make you aware of who your consumers are, the people that you want to make pay for this project. According to Marin County's latest census, about a quarter of Marin County's residents are seniors. 15% of Marin County's residents are single-parent households, and 9% of the Marin County residents live in poverty. You are elected officials this is like these people are going to pay for this. And these people are not numbers. And while everything around Marin looks so nice, a lot of people struggle to make ends meet. And they're easy to forget while we think about other things. And again, going back to that, this is to fulfill the needs for outdoor use mostly. Instead of this pipeline, you could secure the same amount of drinking water through to what Mr. Workman wrote in an article in the Marin. I guess you read it, by fixing the leaks.
And Blackmore.
And okay.
I apologize. 3 minutes per person. We do have one more speaker, Miss Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Miss Price.
Yes, and I will be very short because I have spoken before, but I just want to also say I hope there is time to stop the pipeline and that we, as I've said before, really look very seriously into more conservation and more education for our residents. I do think it is possible with a concerted effort. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to item number 6, Director and General Manager's announcements. Director Ornstein, start with you.
Nothing this evening, President.
Thank you. Director Mayor.
Nothing, thank you.
Director Smith, excuse me, Vice President Smith.
We do the committee reports later?
Yep.
Okay, but Lagunitas TAC now?
Either one. Your
Either one?
choice.
Okay, we'll do it. So on Friday, March 21st, we had a meeting of the Lagunitas Technical Advisory Council. And it was my first time attending this, and I got to say it was a thrill. I was super proud of Eric Ettinger and the team that we have assembled in the group that was around there. Super thoughtful scientists representing the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, Spawn County folks, and very, very thoughtful about making sure we're taking care of our habitat and our critical endangered species, and frankly all the other native folks that we have there. The first thing that we went over was a Nicasio Spillway Gate update. And I thought Jonathan provided an outstanding report. and that generated a lot of thoughts and a lot of response. I think the most interesting part was that the group of experts that is on Lagunitas TAC was focused on making sure we can measure the impact of this on different species, specifically coho and the yellow-legged foothill frog. They also talked through the Lower Lagunitas Creek Restoration Project, which has gone extremely well, as we know, and continues to get additional phases accomplished. Spawn had an outstanding report on survey results, which showed record year across the board for coho salmon and steelhead. It was a remarkable set of achievements that reached near half of our 100-year goal in such a short period of time. So I think people are thrilled if they thought just several years ago when they came up with the targets to say that we've established the habitat for some of these species, that we've made a large step forward. This is shown all the way true, all the way up to Oregon as well, but we're thrilled that we're kind of leading the way, and I think everyone felt quite proud. We went through Japanese knotwood and Chinook salmon and beaver updates, so it was very thoughtful. I'm super psyched to be engaged with this group and hopeful that it'll be productive for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Kush.
No announcements. Thank you.
Director Russell.
Nothing.
Okay. I just have a few. One, I'd like to start out with a big thank you. Sean, your team, Suzanne and her crew. Last week, we got to put trout into Lagunitas Creek, the watershed, with our daughter's school. And as most groups, it was a really fun time. The girls are still singing all the songs that they got to sing out there. So kudos to her and her crew. And then continuing that same vein, last week was the big regional wildfire task force meeting here in Marin County. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to Wednesday night's presentation, but it sounds like Daniel Swain put on quite a good talk. But Thursday was really, I thought, really thoughtful panels all day long. And everywhere I looked, either you saw something from Marin Water or sponsorship from Marin Water. So thank you for moving forward the sponsorship for this event. But also I heard quite a bit from other agencies about how they appreciate what we're doing, how good of a partner we are, how thoughtful we are when we do our work, and how far advanced we are in ecological and environmental monitoring when it comes to actions for risk reduction around wildfire. So again, kudos for all that. It's really good to be seen as a leader in that group. There's a lot of folks doing a lot of good work. When we're seen as a leader, it makes me very proud of organization. So great work on that. And then following that on the Friday with the tours, actually showing off some of the work we did is a pretty neat experience based on the audience that came to this. So again, thank you very much for all that. I don't want to repeat the Lagunitas TAC information that Vice President Smith talked about, but it was another great meeting. And the return of the fish habitat just really, or return of the fish volume, it just speaks to the work that's being done out there. And, it's almost like the field of dreams, and it's working because they're coming back, and it's really neat to see. And hopefully we continue that work as we move down the road. But on that same vein, and Ben, I really just want to give another thank you to all the community engagement that's going on and how proactive we're being on this project and making sure everybody's brought into the fold early and quickly on it, because it's an important one for us. So thank you for the staff's effort for that. Great. Moving on to item number 7, board and committee reports. Do you have any?
Yeah. Okay. A word of caution about the fish. From asking many questions and being with them in those issues many times, cause and effect is not always so easy to determine. There's a lot of randomness. If you think about the anchovies and the sardines in Monterey Bay, they thought they understood them, but they didn't understand them at all. That it's other things that are driving the changes. So be careful. Hopefully you're correct. And it is, our improvements are making the difference. But my experience is, again, it's more complicated than that. On Thursday, March 25, the Planning Committee held its meeting for the month. Staff provided a high-level overview of the planning efforts for implementation of advanced metering infrastructure, including highlighting products and the pilot testing that's going on with various types of advanced metering devices. And these pilots will be used to assist the district in implementing and managing customers' water usage and the process for developing and releasing an RFP for the water efficiency project. Staff also provided an overview of the district's water quality program, highlighting the transport of water from its watershed through its operating systems based upon current and proposed regulations to create high quality and safe drinking water for customers. Additionally, staff announced that the district will open a construction bid for the fire flow improvement program in the Glenwood Transmission Pipeline Replacement Project. That's quite an interesting project because it involves a large number of small sections of pipe, like 100 feet, which makes the project difficult from a contractor standpoint because of the mob and remob to get to these various places. The existing pipeline will be replaced with approximately 6,470 feet of welded steel pipe, which is a substantial improvement over the cast iron pipe that's currently there, installed, as I recall, in 1954 or around there. Staff plan to bring this item back to the board at the April 15th meeting for the board to consider approval of the construction contract for this project. Let's hope we get some good bids on that project. Staff also shared a proposed contract for the award of the San Geronimo Treatment Plant Clearwell Structural Evaluation and Condition Assessment Report, which aligns with the district's 5-year strategic plan to improve the resilience of Marin Water's infrastructure and reduce the district's carbon footprint. I will indicate that I have been asked a few questions about that project. I think we need to preface the discussion of that project going forward with the remembrance of the Loma Prieta impact on the Santa Clara Water District's clarifiers, which are identical to ours, designed by the same consulting firm with the same mistake in them, which caused them to fail. The questions were headed towards why are we doing this? So I think that's something we need to make sure people understand. Staff will bring this item forward to the board at a future meeting to consider approving the project and awarding contract. These reports are available on the public, to the public, through the video recording of the March 25 Planning Committee meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I also have a report from the Watershed Committee meeting that was held on Thursday, March 20th. There were 3 main agenda items. Number 1, staff provided an update on the Mount Tam Watershed Azalea Hill project, stating that an addendum to the initial study and mitigated negative declaration to the project was developed to show minor technical changes to the project, including avoiding rare plant areas and modifying stream crossings. Staff will present this item at tonight's meeting, and the board will consider approval of the proposed revisions to the project. Second item was a staff presentation on the status of the grant funding award from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for Phase 1B of the Lagunitas Creek Enhancement Project. Because of possibilities now and of delayed federal grant funding, staff is also working with the State Department of Water Resources to secure additional funding for Phase 1B. Staff will present this item to the board at a future meeting in May, seeking authorization to award a construction project contract for Phase 1B. Finally, staff also, along with our One Tam partner, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, provided a presentation on a watershed facilities assessment and conceptual plan, which covered various possibilities for upgrading staff facilities, existing housing infrastructure, and improving water visitor day use areas. And this item is actually on tonight's agenda for the board to consider approval of a grant of $200,000 from the Mount Tamalpais Watershed Fund to support continued planning efforts for this project. The staff reports and a video recording of the March 20th meeting are available on Marin Water's website. Thank you.
Great. We also had a meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee, and I believe it was a special meeting of the Board of Directors on Thursday, March 27th. Staff provided 2 items for us to consider for approval this evening, and then 2 other items that were updated. The first was an amendment to the existing agreement between with Athens administrators that will enable us to have them help us with workman's compensation to the tune of not to exceed $130,000. That's on our agenda for approval. For approval. The second item was 2 proposed contracts for temporary staffing on an as-needed basis with Express Employment Professionals and Nelson Connects. That this agreement also is not to exceed $600,000, and it's on our agenda for approval. Staff also provided our monthly financial update and an overview of the current board investment policy number 33, which looked at exploring options in that policy to look at additional investments aligned with the state government codes. This item will be brought back to the Finance Administration Committee meeting in later this month with staff recommendations for approval and modifications of that policy. Finally, the staff provided an update on the proposed budgets for 2025 and 2026, as well as 26-27, and an overview of the personnel services, retiree obligations, and other unfunded accrued liabilities. This is the beginning of our budgeting process, and we're now kind of kicking that into full gear. At the next FAC meeting, the staff will provide a more detailed overview of the CIP budget. All of this can be viewed in the staff reports and video on our website for the March 27 Finance and Administration Committee and special meeting of the Board of Directors. And that's all.
Good. Very busy 2 weeks. Thank you for the updates for those committees. Moving on to item number 8, consent items. Terry, do you have any public comment on consent items?
Not on the consent.
Okay.
Consent.
Could I please have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
President Sampson.
Yes. Moving on to number 9, regular items. A, Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project revisions. Director Horn.
Good evening, board members. I'm Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources. The item before you has a recommended action of approving the project revisions pursuant to the CEQA addendum for the Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project. And we're going to pull up a presentation this evening for you and walk you through those addendums. So for this presentation, we'll provide a brief overview of the project, talk about the recently completed work, the environmental compliance that we're bringing forward this evening, and then next steps on the project. So some background about the Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project. It's 3 phases. The phase 1 is our equestrian and hiking route up and over Azalea Hill. Phase 2 and 3 are a multi-use route that bring people from the lakes area up to Bolinas, Fairfax Road to connect to Pine Mountain. The benefit of this project was phase 3 of it was an old roadbed. Phase 2 was an old social trail. And then this project also includes restoration and removal of about 4.4 miles of social trails that are in the hatched area on top of Azalea Hill. This project's been well funded. We had a grant from the State Parks Recreational Trails Program for phase 3. We've been successful in receiving a grant from the California Conservation Corps North Bay for their crews to support construction on it. The EMIG Trust provided district funding for the Bullfrog Bridge. That was matched by some funding from the Mount Tam Fund. And then we also have utilized volunteers to support construction throughout this project and received a donation from the Marin MCBC, Marin County Bicycle Coalition, for one of the bridge features along phase 2. The crossings there's a number of crossings along the multi-use route that we've been improving over the past year and a half or so. There's a number of them, about 6, that we've identified an approach that can be lesser than what was proposed. And so one of the main objectives of this project was to be light on the land as we did and implemented the construction to try to protect the sensitive resources out here. And we identified some sites that could be left as is or slightly modified. And so that's the subject of the addendum that we're bringing forward. And we also, so to just review those briefly, we've removed a bridge and been able to approach that with armoring that crossing instead of putting that bridge in. That allowed us to protect some sensitive plants in that area. We also modified Site 8 from armoring to just hand placing larger rocks at that site. It was a very small crossing. And then Site 11 was a culvert that we were proposing to slip line, but that required us to bring equipment out to that site that we couldn't access it with. So in this case, that culvert is continuing to function as is. And so we're proposing not to slip line it at this time. And then site 16, we're moving away from armoring that site, and it is functioning as it is intended, with some drainage improvements to the trail tread itself. 22 was a causeway that we've removed from the project based on our ability to do some additional trail work and remove the water from the trail and reduce the need for that causeway. And then site 25 was armoring, and we've left a culvert in place rather than armoring that site as well. And so those are the big changes for the stream crossings. In addition to that, there was a section that went through a serpentine grassland, and we wanted to protect some of the rare plants in that area. So our botanist proposed a trail narrowing section for this segment of the trail. So it's about 288 feet. And what we're proposing to do here is not widen it to that multi-use standard. It's not an ideal, solution for this project, but it does protect the resources, and we really think it meets that light on the land objective. It does mean that rangers, if they were approaching this trail with a UTV or ATV, they would be using it as an out and back trail. So they would approach from the lakes area or Bolinas Fairfax Road, and that was kind of a safety goal of the project, was to be able to get people in and out of there in the case of an emergency. Now, for the trail narrowing section, there's additional measures that we've added to the project to mitigate that narrowing. That is a yield sign to ensure that people are moving at a slow speed through that section, a sign that helps people understand the sensitive nature of the plants along that trail and to stay on the trail. There's also ongoing monitoring as part of the project as it was adopted originally that we'll continue to do through this segment. And then if there are any impacts to plants from the use that's approved for this, we would mitigate it in accordance with our existing adopted CEQA document that would allow us to move forward with it. So there'd be no ATV or UTV access through this 288 section. That's the big change. We do feel that that trail narrowing will be accommodated by our visitors, and that it'll still support their access, and we'll be monitoring to ensure there's no impacts from this change. So next steps for the project, we have a volunteer appreciation event on Saturday, May 3rd. This is going to be around 9 to 10 a.m. in the morning, and then we have a trail volunteer event on the heels of that. And so this will be for volunteers who have supported the construction of the Azalea Hill multi-use route. And then we're also intending to open that route on May 1st. So we're doing our kind of punch list items right now, installing the signage that I just spoke about, and then that'll be ready to open on May 1st for our visitors. We're continuing our rare plant surveys through phase 1. That's going to support the work that we have intended to do this coming summer for that equestrian and hiking route. We'll continue to host volunteer days throughout that Azalea Hill project. And then we are moving forward with designing a parking lot at the Azalea Hill trailhead. And that was one of the components of this project that we hope to move forward with in the next year or so. And then we anticipate completion of the entire phase 1 project by 2026. And so with that, we'll take any questions that you might have about the project and the addendum, but we're super excited to advance this project, and we think that this is a good step forward.
Great, Sean, thank you very much. Director comments, we can start on this side. Director Russell.
Well, it's nice to see this thing coming to an end. It's been a long grind, and appreciate you hanging in there and keep taking steps and keep working. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. It's, great to see this now, this summary a couple of times. I think it all really is clear. It seems like the addendum, the activities outlined in the addendum are actually reducing the overall footprint of this activity. So from an environmental perspective, I hope that's a positive. I think you've identified some potential concerns if that 288-foot section is not respected by all the users. Clearly, you'll be monitoring that and managing it. Do include reports on how the trail use is proceeding and whether all the users are behaving as we would hope. But I do imagine that if we continue with volunteer trail days, that will involve a lot of the users, that will also maintain some sense of ownership of this important asset. So thanks a lot for getting it across the finish line.
Good.
No comments. Thanks.
Great. Sean, thank you for this. Thank you for the presentation last week or 2 weeks ago, and then for all the work you guys have done on this. And, everyone keeps focusing on the trail, the trail, the trail, the trail. But it's important to look at the actual hashed out line on top of Azalea Hill and actually look to see what a key component of this project is. And that really is a conservation effort to mitigate or reduce the impact to areas that shouldn't be impacted and provide folks a way to do that as well. And so, well, I think it's a great trail. I think it's being very well used. I don't want it to get lost about what's going on. It would be great if we have informational kiosks at the parking lot explaining not only, what you can do damage wise by choosing to leave the trail, but also all the work that's been done to protect this area, which is pretty neat. And I think, in the same vein of the reports of the new section, that 288-foot section, which I think is a very responsible look and change, would be the same to see how if folks start trying to re-enjoy the social trails that were removed from this project too, because that's just as important as what we're doing here. So great work to you and your team, and hopefully we don't go down the same road in terms of workload for the same amount of trail again, because it was a big lift. That's appreciated. Great. Terry, any public comment on this item?
Mr. Larry Minikis.
Yes, good evening, and thank you, Sean. And reading the panorama report, I just want to mention appreciation for the amount of effort that went in to protect the rare and endangered species along that trail. I know when we walked it several years ago with the Native Plant Society, it's a shame none of them are here this evening, they voiced a lot of concerns, and it's really great to see that they're being addressed. And the one thing that isn't being mentioned is that there are some spectacular views on this trail, so it's going to be people are going to love it when it gets open. So with that, thank you so much.
That's pretty cool, Larry. Thanks for flagging that.
And thanks for those pictures that you took of the dead critters. Those are still stuck in my head, the lizards and stuff that were on the trail that I recall anyway.
Great. Possibly we can use this as a box to burn from too. Great. Thank you very much. Then we'll move on to item number B, recycled water system
Wait.
update. I'm sorry, we need
a-
apologize. Can we have a motion, please, to
So moved.
Second.
roll call, please?
Director Russell.
Do we need public comment?
We just did.
Oh, that was what that was.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Mhm.
Aye.
Vice President Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush.
Aye.
Director Mayer.
Aye.
President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Moving on to item 9B, recycled water system update.
Yeah, good evening. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director, joined by Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager, who's pulling up our presentation. As we were looking at recycled water, I think there are not too many agencies that have been recycling water longer than Marin Municipal. Two that I know of, one's kind of surprising. It's a South Tahoe PUD. That started in 1967, I think, moving water out of the Tahoe Basin.
Or stupid as it's,
Right, as its acronym is.
yes.
The other, of course, is for those of us who've been in recycled water for a while, it's Water Factory 21. And that has its roots down in Orange County Water District. And it's the precursor, if you like, of the groundwater replenishment project that is today down there. I think that started producing water in 1976, if I'm not mistaken, and pumping that water into the groundwater basin to prevent salinity. Marin Water, believe it or not, and you'll see some slides here this evening, started recycling water in 1976 during that drought. It's kind of a swords to plowshares story because they were using the old Nike missile vaults on top of the hill out there at McInnes to store the recycled water. And when people saw them up there, staff was up there, and apparently they would just say, "Hey, can I get some of that water?" So that was the start of recycling here in Marin. With that little backdrop, I'll turn it over to Lucy for the rest of the presentation tonight.
And also one of the early starts of recycled water in California, right? I mean, we were early.
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, Board of Directors, Lucy Croy. As Paul mentioned, we'll have an update on recycled water. Starting first with a foundation of what is recycled water in the industry. You hear a number of terms used, so we thought it would be helpful to start off with just an introduction of what we're talking about tonight. I'll give a little bit of history on Marin Water's program, a bit more than Paul just gave. And then the opportunities for increased use in our system, and then close out with an evaluation of the capacity of our current system. So recycled water, we all have some understanding that it's reuse in the industry. I was at the water reuse conference last week, and you hear many of these terms used very interchangeably. So it's always good to start off first describing what we're talking about. And for this presentation, we're going to focus on recycled water purple pipe. So treated wastewater that is used for irrigation, toilet flushing, washing down surfaces and other outdoor use, but not used for drinking or cooking. What is becoming more known in the industry is direct and indirect potable reuse. And that's where there's more of an advanced treatment to wastewater, and it's purified to actually drinking water quality standards. And we've talked about that in previous presentations, the opportunities there. So for our Purple Pipe program at the district, we, as Paul mentioned, have had a long history. Starting back in 1975, we had a pilot recycled water treatment plant in collaboration with Las Colinas that we pushed into production very quickly during that 1977 drought. And then in 1981, built a 1 MGD recycled water plant, and then had to upgrade it in 1990 to 2 MGD, also because the regulations changed and needed higher quality recycled water to meet the regulations at the time. It's also when we started to see an expansion in our system. And then over the years, our facility in the Las Colinas, Terra Linda area, we decommissioned it in 2019, and Las Colinas built a 5.4 MGD plant that we bought into, and we now distribute water directly from that plant. Our current demand, this map showing our distribution system is about 700 acre feet per year. We have about 350 customers, primarily used for irrigation, but we also have about 48 or so buildings that customers that use indoor use, so dual plumbing for toilet flushing, cooling towers, and that's one of the other ways that we've pioneered recycled water use in our service area is by using recycled water indoors. For 33 San Pablo, it's a building right off Highway 101. We were the first to actually pioneer using that in a condominium, as well as cooling towers and car washes.
And the Embassy Suites. The hotel that's behind the
Toilet
Civic
flushing.
Center.
We have a commercial truck hauling program that runs all the time. That's used for dust control. So any commercial agency or contractor can work with our recycled water program, reach out to our staff and get trained, and then pick up recycled water as they need to, and sign a log of how much they're taking. And all in all, this is about 25 miles of separate infrastructure that we maintain in the system of recycled water pipeline, 3 pump stations and 2 storage tanks. So what our demand has looked like over the years, I mentioned that our treatment plant was upgraded in 1990 with a 2 MGD. So you can see starting in 1990 through early 2000, we saw quite an increase in demand, primarily as customers that we identified switched over from potable use to non-potable use. And then over the years, we've largely seen our demand in the recycled water system flatline, more or less. We've stayed around 700 acre feet, give or take, a few droughts, a few recessions, but bounced up and down. And that's largely without having a huge demand increase from a larger anchor tenant, such as a Chevron or some new industry coming into our residential area. And when we look at ways to increase our recycled water use, there's 3 primary ways that we look at it. There's infill, so converting customers that are now on potable use to recycled water as they redevelop the property, or They develop the property and it's just a lot at this point that's within our service area. We expand the system either using a phased or a project-based approach. Or lastly, adding a new recycled water system. This system that we currently operate is based off Las Colinas, but there's other sanitary sewer agencies in our service area that we could work with. Over the years, our expansion has not occurred not without trying. There's been many feasibility studies, and the frequency has been quite often. As you can see, we have looked over the years at ways to make this work, ways to find projects that make sense, that investing capital into the recycled water system makes sense within our capital program and within the larger district. So the investment in our recycled water system, sorry, it's not without trying. And so we continue to look for opportunities, even doing a study with CMSA in 2022, looking at DPR and what it would take in order to go that route. When we talk about phased expansions, phased often can seem the most, seem like the greatest opportunity because you'll bite off a bigger piece of the system, you'll have a larger demand. We look at grouping projects together and look at a route. So the purple area is our existing system, and we would look at adding a phased expansion 1 through 10 in the blue. And in this area, we've identified customers that we would move over to recycled water based on their irrigation use currently. And so you can see on the table the amount of demand that's been identified, as well as the capital cost. And as you can see that often the capital cost is very high compared to the supply, and it's very challenging within the limited budget that we have and the limited capital that we have.
Lucy, are those estimated capital costs, or those would be for new projects, just to actually just put pipe in the ground, build it all up, independent of anything else we're doing?
Yes, it would be just to put the pipe in the ground. So this phase 1 through 10, the second line would be to expand from the purple through the blue. So to put pipe in the ground.
And I think where I'm going with this is, if we have something like this, a concept that we think is a good idea, but we're right now cost restrictive on it, based on cost benefit for it. We're seeing pipeline projects come through all the time, and in those reports, we're always saying there's no near supply for recycled water, so we're not going to consider putting pipe in the ground. Does it make sense to include pipe in the ground in those phased in areas if we're doing other water pipe replacement projects for future use, so we can fill in the gaps as opposed to creating big runs?
I don't know that we've really ever looked at doing that. I know engineering has, as you say, they sort of check the box to make sure that there isn't a planned project or supply close by. But you can imagine it may take many years for us to bring a recycled water pipe to, the south area of central San Rafael.
Or even never.
And so when you install that asset, that pipe costs you the same as a potable pipe to install. It's if you're installing it separately, it's still $3 million a mile. If you're including it as part of a potable project, you've got separation standards for the pipe that need to occur. So it's not sort of this a free rider type of situation that you might expect. So there's still going to be a significant cost to put that pipe in the ground, and it would just be a buried asset until we were able to connect it to a recycled water.
Well, it could do, for instance, the fire could be put through that pipeline, the fire supply.
If you connected it to the potable, I suppose, and just sort of used it as a dual pipeline.
Yeah, just fed the fire from it instead of feeding it from the regular one. It's an interesting question. I've asked it many times because of exactly what you observed. If you don't do it, it's hard. It's a big bite. It's a tricky thing. Important in the second one that's listed there, less so with Peacock Gap. But San Quentin's our largest water user. So anything we do at San Quentin is important in terms of overall impact. And it's something to keep in mind that these, in my opinion, don't have to pencil out on a cost benefit basis, because it's a situation, you have a one-time capital cost that keeps returning the investment. I mentioned the Never because the Country Mart shopping center, at the cost of the developer, was fully double plumbed. The one that's on St. Sir Francis Drake across from the ferry, and they've never received reclaimed water. So basically, it's all the pieces are there, except there's no supply, because the water from CSMA, which is what they intended to use, was too salty to be able to do that. So they needed more treatment, a lot more treatment, before you could use that water. So that's the tricky part, is if you make them do it and then you don't bring it to them, you know, it's kind of unfair to the person who has to build it. So it gets a little tricky.
Yeah.
Lucy, one.
Sorry, one more question on the capital costs. In the cases where we're looking at residential use, these don't include the cost that the households would take on for connecting.
Correct. This is the district cost.
This would
to
be
put
just the district side.
Right.
Typically, recycled water isn't used in residential settings.
Can't be.
It's not used.
But
We
for
have-
irrigation, say.
You have some in multi-unit, like
Right.
a condominium complex in the irrigation in the front yard, that's okay, but in a single family residence, it's challenging.
They're
But-
petrified that the homeowner might create a cross connection.
So,
between
so,
the two.
so even in our existing recycled water system,
Right.
in that case, because they're double piped, we do have use for irrigation and flushing toilets in houses, or we
Not in
do
single family.
not in single
Single
family.
They have to
Oh,
have a
no.
central, like an HOA that controls
There has
it.
to be a stationary engineer there for us to move forward.
I
But
didn't
for
realize that.
commercial, they
Okay.
would still need to install all the plumbing themselves,
Okay,
to answer your original question.
thanks.
As a phased approach can be a big bite to take all at once, as you saw. We've also looked at taking smaller bites, looking at projects such as Peacock Gap, which is the most recent, and looking at ways that we can move the needle forward, and move into expanding our recycled water system through projects. One of the most recent is Peacock Gap, and we developed in 2022 a preliminary design, also to be ready for any grant opportunities that came up, and looked at 3 alternative routes that we could take to get out to Peacock Gap, as they are irrigation and large user. And so you can see on the map that we looked at taking it through central San Rafael and picking up a few more users, going out along the green, through the bay, and then also the blue line. And ultimately, the orange line was the selected best route, but still coming in about 26 million for a demand of about 285 acre feet per year. Some of it we found were that some of the users along that route that we would have 10, 15 years ago, irrigation would have been moved over to recycled. The high schools have moved over to turf, and they don't use potable water the same way that they used to.
Probably in part because we never brought the water to them. The water stops in about the middle of San Rafael, not very far from the high school, but we got pushback substantially from San Rafael on tearing up their streets to run recycled water. And
Right.
the route you just showed is on San
Yeah.
Pedro Road.
You can
Goes
imagine.
around. That's a pretty narrow road. We would be a big obstacle constructing something like that.
Absolutely. Lastly, when we look at expanding the system, as I mentioned, one other alternative is to build off of another treatment plant, so CMSA, near San Quentin. So with that approach, we look at what are the treatment upgrades that would be needed, and then what are the opportunities to move any customers in that area. So we've done studies in the last 10 years with CMSA and with SASM, Sewage Agency of Southern Marin and Mill Valley. And these are the top projects that we've come up with for each of those studies. So with San Quentin, it would be 150 acre feet per year. And that project was estimated at 11 million. And with SASM, it was 81 acre feet for 4 million.
I think you should also indicate that San Quentin gave us a clear wording that they felt they were being put upon in that evaluation, that they felt we were bending them into having to do it. Like, we've done enough already. Get off our backs. That's at least what I remember from.
Have you looked at the new real estate project right between SASM and San Quentin as a potential other user here? It's another 2,000 units. I
Is
believe.
it the Oak Hill one?
Yeah,
or the-
the States building.
It's the gun
Right in between.
range. I think it,
Yep.
yeah,
Yes.
That absolutely should be a factor because that could make this
Ye-
much more cost
I
effective.
think it's a really good idea. Yeah. And it won't speak exactly about that, but kind of moving forward, we'll talk about the capacity of our current system. And so one of the pieces we look at is future demand when we're evaluating our existing system. You mentioned the demand closer to CMSA, but in our existing system, the reference we use is the housing element that have been updated because of the regional housing needs assessment that was put upon by the state. So the state came out a few years ago, as you all probably are aware, with a required number of dwelling units per city, per area. For Marin, it's 14,000. And within the service area that we have existing in Terra Linda, we've identified about 1,700 that are can be served by recycled water. About half of those are the Northgate development. And
So with
yeah.
that too, I think it's important to incorporate, it looks like that red line stays on the San Rafael city boundary. The top line going across the map.
Yes.
There's significant interest in developing the St. Vincent Silvera property, the Marinwood, and all the way out Lucas Valley Road by Old Juvenile Hall and some of those areas, which I think are going to be significant numbers, not comparable to Northgate, but somewhat close.
It's a good point. And it's another piece of what we can look at as we move forward.
And the pipeline's already there because Las Colinas sends water north to Novato, right
Mhm.
past that.
Right on the
location you're
smart
talking about.
lane. yeah,
To North
right on
Marin.
the because I think, when you start looking at those, it'll be interesting to see how those start chipping away at our capacity, which is
Mhm.
important.
But on the other hand, I can remember discussions about St. Vincent's since I joined the board,
Mhm.
and nothing has gotten built. It's still got cows.
Which I think we all don't know. RENA is it's a assessment that projecting needs that should be built by 2031. So we've included it in our urban water management plan. We're looking at it for recycled water, but we all can guess what will happen over the next few years. So, but it's important for us to look and make conservative estimates of what the capacity is. With recycled water and thinking about capacity, recycled water is a bit more dependent on irrigation or follows the irrigation pattern. So as you can see, than our potable water. So during the summer months, May through October, we see about a little bit over 75% of our total usage for recycled water. And we actually have a little bit more than we used to in January, February, December because of the toilet flushing and the dual plumbing that's happened in the last 10, 15 years. So that's good to see. But largely irrigation is the bulk, and also looking at the peak. Peak is July, August. But what that means is that treatment largely, there's treatment available during those off months. So for dual plumbing, for toilet flushing. But we may be constrained more when it comes to irrigation during the peak months. The recycled water facility at Las Colinas was constructed in 2011 originally for 1.4 MGD and expanded in 2021 by another 4 MGD to a total of 5.4. As you mentioned, it feeds both North Marin and us. Our share is about 2.5, our contractual amount is about 2.5 MGD. And we haven't exceeded that at any point or needed to. The peak that we saw last summer, which was the peak we've seen, was 1.6 MGD during the summer months. As we see, the summer months are where we get the peak demand, peak challenging months for meeting demand. Under dry conditions, we've estimated that there's approximately 1,000 acre-feet available from May through October, based on the effluent, the wastewater effluent that's coming into Las Colinas. So if we were to go through a dry period, we're speaking with Las Colinas, what they've estimated is that there would be 1,000 acre-feet over that 6-month period, about 2.2 MGD.
So
yeah.
does that mean that the current treatment capacity exceeds their available effluent? It sounds like it's about 5,000 acre-feet per year.
So there are, there's a planning level analysis that we're talking about this evening that relates to generally supply and demand of wastewater and demand on the irrigation toilet flushing side. When you start looking at plant design and capacities of plant design, recycled water is a little bit unique. All of that water demand generally for irrigation occurs in a very short period of time, maybe maximum 8 hours. So between midnight and 8 a.m., all the demand occurs. What that means is your peaking factor is 3 times what your average flow rate might be. So if you have a peak day of 1.6 MGD, that's the average over the 24 hours. But all of that 1.6 MGD is used in the first 8 hours of the day. So you've got to have a high treatment capacity in order to be able to refill your system and accommodate those kinds of flow rates, unless you have massive amounts of storage out in the system. So you typically build a recycled water plant like the one at Las Colinas at a much higher capacity than you would normally see. You could alternatively build lots of storage out in the system, but as you know, that's a difficult thing to do in Marin.
I think you should also indicate that we gave them our chlorine contact chamber, which was built to eliminate one of those Nike tanks on the top of the hill. And so there's a $7 million tank that we gave them, which has 2 parts. The inner part is a chlorine contactor. The other part is storage. And we just walked away from that, basically said, here, it's yours. And we use it. We take our water from that tank, but we built it in total to facilitate our recycle plant, which was on their property. And then we walked away from that. I think the other thing that you should mention here is that the Las Colinas approach was far superior to ours, not because they're smarter than us, but because they were willing to do it, which is they now take suction directly from the treated water. We took suction from the pond. They have these big bird sanctuary ponds that are there because they can't discharge 6 months of the year. So they have these huge ponds. Well, the disadvantage of getting that is the water is jade green with algae. And our plant was 80% the removal of algae. It was a very complicated process to get algae out. And it was very hard to operate. And also our guys didn't particularly like running the wastewater and the water side of it. That was kind of messy. So what Las Colinas did is they took suction directly out of their treated effluent. And
before it goes into the pond.
It never goes to the pond. Yeah, never gets there.
They've changed that operation a little bit now, and they're able to use pond water blended with effluent. So things change, but yeah, that's how.
And then they have membranes, which brings them. Our plant was based on this special filter that was used to, after heavy chemical treatment, to remove the algae. Then it was filtered for recycle. And theirs is membrane treated. So it's not reverse osmosis, but it's a lesser membrane, but still does a much better job than filters for removing particles.
Yeah. Very happy with the water quality.
Mhm.
It's very high quality. We don't have any issues at all in the system. During the dry period, we estimate about 1,000 acre feet over that irrigation period. And the treatment capacity, as Paul was mentioning, is much higher. It's about 2,200 acre feet over the same time period. And so what we're finding is that the source water would be the limiting factor, as treatment capacity would far exceed it. So stepping back, our current demand averages about 700 acre feet per year, with the most of it occurring during the irrigation season. And any potential new developments from RENA, we're estimating at this point 70 to 85 acre feet, but adding in County of Marin with St. Vincent up to 100 acre feet, or we would estimate looking forward. But we feel confident that it can supply the 1,000 acre feet is under the threshold. So we believe there's adequate capacity to accommodate the RENA increases. If there were other big projects coming up that were planned, we would need to take a further look, a more detailed look at the treatment capacity. So our next steps are to continue monitoring the development and opportunities to increase recycled water use in our system, and follow the industry and technology advancements, not only nearby, but across the state, especially as they get implemented. And then to update the board at future meetings on program developments and funding opportunities for the projects that we can find. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Great. Lucy, Paul, thank you very much. Board comments, Director Mayer.
No comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this back and listening to us about the importance of having recycled water still on our agenda, just because we've chosen some paths through water conservation and efficiency measures, and moving forward with the next steps with conveyance. No doubt this is a drought-resistant answer for us. It's a one water approach, looking at the water that's already here and trying to make the best out of it. I'm super hopeful that we can find some projects to move forward with. And as Larry said earlier, this is in a way insurance more than just buying water. This is the way that when we have a drought, that we will have a supply that we don't have right now, and it'll be ongoing. So thank you for bringing it forward, and I encourage us to keep moving at swift pace. Thank you.
Dr. Kush.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lucy, Paul, for the great update. It was interesting to note that at least in the Terra Linda, that that northern area of our distribution system, we do still have capacity that we can utilize as developments proceed. So that's encouraging in itself, as we also look for options to expand capacity to reach other areas. I know there's the North Bay Water Reuse Authority. Are we seeing encouraging activity there that may support our efforts?
So we are members of the authority and participate in their meetings. This is the goal of that group is essentially to look for grant funding. That's the primary purpose of it, as a regional entity with sort of projects from each of the members. And as a member, our project at the moment that's in that grouping is the San Quentin project. And we could, of course, update that and include Peacock Gap as well. But since it's really grant funding, I feel the cost of adding it to the North Bay Water Reuse Authority portfolio is probably more than, because they have to redo all of their environmentals for the program and the project. It may be more efficient for us just to look for funding for Peacock Gap on our own. But San Quentin is part of that project portfolio from the North Bay Water Reuse Authority.
Okay, good. So at least with respect to San Quentin, we are actively trying to move that forward in collaboration with the Water Reuse Authority.
The reason it wasn't already done is that when they put the first title together, or whatever it was called, there was a line that went along Sir Francis Drake, and you couldn't be south of that line. The projects could only be north of that line. That's why it wasn't picked up originally. And Napa was the big one. Napa got like a 4,000% return on their investment. Our return on investment has been negative.
We did actually, because we participated in the recycled water facility at Las Colinas, and they were awarded some funds for that. I think a couple $1 million even out of a $6 or $7 million build. So arguably, we were sort of a backdoor beneficiary of the water authority. But
Good comment.
and you're
Backdoor is probably the better part of it. It's an interesting situation, the whole concept here. I think it's time to redo the map. When I joined the board, the first thing I asked was for the map of the recycled water. The map of the recycled water shows 9 areas to be plumbed. 1 was done when I joined the board. 1 is done today. But you've indicated a few other ones like the St. Vincent's. I think maybe it's time to relook at that map, and maybe that would kind of revigorate it in thinking. Their assessment is accurate and it's right on. That the problem is every time we move forward, we hit a wall, which is really for 150 acre feet, you want to spend that much money? And it just goes on and on and on. I will relay a funny story. We work for Auberge, and they own this facility called Calistoga Ranch, which burned down in one of the fires. But Calistoga Ranch was a very, very high-end hotel in Napa Valley on Silverado Trail. And we had a 100% recycle facility there. So we had a membrane reactor plant, and we took that water and they irrigated with it. And we had a meeting, and they asked us, well, we need more water. And I go, well, you're using all of your wastewater now. There's no more water available. But they didn't even get that the source of the water was their own water, and they had to use more water for us to have more water, to give them back more water. They didn't understand that. They did after the explanation, sorta, but I don't know they ever really accepted it. They just looked at it as, why can't you just get more out of it, you know? And Jed, you're exactly right. This is 100% drought proof because you always have wastewater. And the question is the quality. That one happens to be mostly our water that feeds Las Colinas, which is kind of an interesting twist. So it's very low in salt, and they don't have a lot of infiltration. One thing about the Water Factory 21 project that you mentioned, that's its old name, the one they used for saltwater intrusion, 90% of the water that was injected in the ground was drunk. And the people never knew that, never realized it. 10% went to the ocean and 90% went inland until they hit a wall. And this is with Phil's comments. The recycled water had a product called NDMA in it, and they started picking it up in the drinking water wells. That's a disinfection byproduct that occurs in the wastewater during the treatment of the wastewater that went through the membranes. They have reverse osmosis, went through the membranes, got into the water that was reinjected, which then caused Mesa Consolidated, who's the water supply for it in the John Wayne Airport, to exceed the standards for NDMA in their wells, shutting their wells down. So I think they shut down 4 out of 9 as a result. And it is the kind of issue with reclaimed water that you have to be careful with, that things sneak up on you that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like that material NDMA. So, you know, it's no matter how clever the engineers are, there are things that occur that don't necessarily fall out of the evaluation. You know, you are drinking a water of lesser quality. And Henry Ongerth, who was the state's sanitary engineer, made a statement over and over again, which was use the highest quality water for the highest quality need. And that is kind of the way we're operating, if you think about it. Now, the irrigation side of it's more complicated, but then you get the state involved, and these regs this thing's a book. and getting thicker. The December activity, which made the direct potable reuse possible. Understand too that desal is a workaround the direct potable reuse. The fact you cannot use treated wastewater at that time to put it into the system, but you could put desal in, even though desal, you're coming out of the bay, which has got all kinds of stuff in it, all removed during treatment, but it still was just a way around that issue. And one last thing, George Shabanagos and I have been talking, and George is a professor at Davis, was a professor at Davis. He's still alive, but he prefers the term purified water to DPR. And I think that's something we should perhaps pick up in our terminology. For one, it's less technical sounding. And if you notice the bottles of water that are given away at casinos and places like that, heavy bottled water users, it all says purified water. What does that mean? Who knows? But it's treated beyond whatever it's, most of the bottled water that you see, probably 80% of it is taken from domestic water supply. LA Water Empire's largest client was Arrowhead, who used their water, treated their water and put it in bottles and sold it for 10 times more than LA Water Empire sells it for. But that purified water, I think, has an interesting twist to it because people kind of like, oh, that's an interesting term, as opposed to direct potable reuse, which has kind of a, what does that mean? So anyway, food for thought.
All right. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for keeping it to just what we currently have and not going down the other two different types of recycled waters to convolute it. So I appreciate it. When we look at this map, and I think to Director Russell's point here, we're looking at a map that has not been expanded, and we can easily list constraints or running into walls as part of the issue. But we're driving now, I think, a development component, residential development component that we haven't seen at least in a couple of decades in terms of required growth. If we don't have a plan on what we would want this system to be to meet that, then when the homes get here, we're going to be way behind the 8 ball. But if we have a conceptual, or maybe even a little bit further than that, do we need a tank on the St. Vincent's property? Do we need additional things that could be identified to the developers to be able to build these systems out now? So when they come with hat in hand, then we already have options to allow them to be able to contribute to the system, which I think would be a really interesting thing to have. But if we just keep admiring the map we have now, and I'm not saying the staff is doing just that, so please don't take it like that, but if we don't have a conceptual design plan for something a little bit bigger, that seems to me that would be the place where we'd want to drive, so that when these developers come, we'd have a better understanding of what we need to be able to meet the need through tertiary water, if that's something we want to do, especially through the dual plumbing component of that. And looking at some of the things here, you talked about the Lucas Valley extension coming off there, and right down from Lucas Valley Road where the pipe currently terminates. We're going to have some development at Juvenile Hall site. There's going to be some stuff right on Mount Lassen, and then there's a school down the street that would love to take all this for all their fields like the rest of the schools in the district. So there is I think some low-hanging fruit in this area too, in addition to more of a conceptual piece for that. So, and with that, any other board comments? Okay, great. Terry, any public comment?
Yes, we have 3 so far. Bill Sauter, Jack, and then Larry Minikits.
Thank you, Paul and Lucy. While I was waiting for the presentation to go online today, I looked at what Sonoma Water is doing in the way of recycled water. I've heard that the Russian River watershed has so much water that most of it just flows out to sea, so I wasn't expecting to find a lot of activity around recycled water. I was surprised that recycled water is a key part of Sonoma Water's resiliency portfolio. I learned that they're almost finished with a phase 1 project that extends down into Marin, has 46 miles of pipeline, and delivers 5,500 acre feet of recycled water at a cost of $104 million. That's $19,000 per acre foot of recycled water, and they must think it's worth it as they're planning a phase 2 project. While we're now planning a potable water pipeline toward them, they're planning a non-potable water pipeline down toward us. One thing I'm curious about was the definition of demand, which is estimated at 700 acre feet annually. It's an average of 625,000 gallons a day, mostly for summer irrigation. But we know that Marin residential customers currently use half their potable water outdoors, and that it would be as much as 8 million gallons a day. So it's likely that the demand of a number of 625,000 gallons or 700 acre feet a day means we don't have, 700 acre feet means we don't have any way to get recycled water to 90% of those who could use it. One story I heard recently concerned a customer who spent over $1 million during the last drought trucking in water for his landscaping. Sonoma Water currently has a trucking program for these folks, and I thought Marin Water used to, but I don't think we did, or probably, and we don't now have a heavy use or heavy delivery to residential customers. So the $1 million that guy spent that could have ended up in ours ended up in somebody else's pocket. The more I think about it, the more it seems that recycled water represents a major opportunity for Marin Water, especially in times of drought, as others have said. Firstly, it would be a source of summer revenue when we're looking to save potable water. Instead of losing that potable water revenue, we could replace it with recycled water revenue. Second, we have customers who are eager to protect their lawns in times of drought and think nothing of a $14,000 water bill. Along with $1 million customers, these customers could help fund a neighborhood recycled water distribution system. And third, the more water we can keep in our reservoirs, the more our customers continue to enjoy reliable, high-quality water from our own watershed and save the cost of pumping in more lower-quality water outside at a higher price. I think it would be nice if we could proceed from all our studies, and as others have said, resume investing in a recycled water distribution network in small, localized areas where demand is high.
Back, please, and there, please.
As expensive as gray water reuse may be, I do think it's important to always also also think about the fact that, first of all, that water is always guaranteed more so than Russian River water. And second, although this wasn't mentioned, I suspect the pumping cost that comes with gray water is lower, given it's doesn't have to be pumped nearly as great of a distance as Russian River water does. And then we also don't have to purchase this water from Sonoma County like we do with Russian River water. So as expensive as it may look, there are ways in which it is likely less expensive than the Russian River water.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to focus on two areas, and that's watching the slides. I recognize that there may be an issue here with both the Peacock Gap preliminary design and the design for San Quentin, and that is that parts of this pipeline are going to run right along the bay, and we're going to have to factor in sea level rise. So that may raise costs substantially. And I brought another matter up previously, which is thinking small and looking at what Sand City did in Monterey. And they started in 2007. Larry will know this. They finished in 2010. They built a small 300 acre foot per year desal plant. The cost for building that plant then was 5.2 million. Let's say it's triple now, 15 million. It might still be feasible, or at least worth looking at, to see if placing a small plant at San Quentin makes any sense at all. I do not have the answer. I'm not advocating for it, but it may be worth looking because you don't have to tear up infrastructure to put in a line to it or anything like that. And it may be economic. I don't know the answer, but it may be worth looking at. Larry probably knows a hell of a lot more about this than I do. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
To that end, for one thing,
From Larry to Larry.
I don't know if I still do, but I did represent San Quentin, the community. Is it still in my district? I don't know. It's kind of skinny out there. It's between you or me.
No, not me, Diana.
Ranjiv?
We're all passing it.
Yeah,
We'll come back to this later.
It's
Yeah,
Diana,
yeah.
it's you or me. Anyway, they were adamant. There's only like 6 houses. They're the ones that right on the road
Quentin
going into the
Village,
prison.
yeah.
And I had to commit to them that we would continue to keep them on the fresh water. They wouldn't get the water that San Quentin's getting. They went ballistic on that issue. In their minds, at least, it was fine for the prisoners, but not fine for them. So that's a little twist. It's not that big of a deal because the tank that's up on the hill is the state's tank, the one that feeds the water there. They take our water. If you look up on the hill when you drive past San Quentin, you'll see a large storage tank that the state built for their supply. So that tank would be converted over to the reclaimed water. And then we'd have to work on how to get the water to the folks in San Quentin who don't want the reclaimed water. So anyway, that's just something to keep in mind about San Quentin, which is kind of an interesting twist that I did not anticipate. when-
Purified water.
Purified water, yes.
Mm,
Okay, Terry, any more public comment?
There are none.
Okay, that move on to item number 10, future board and committee meetings.
Sorry, I was looking at the map and it looks like Director Russell's still the
I
representative.
think so.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Okay. At the end of this week, we'll have the North Bay Watershed Association meeting. And Monday is the Sonoma WACTAC meeting. In about 2 weeks, I believe the week of April 14th, we'll have our regular Board of Directors meeting and the Tamales Bay Foundation will have a meeting. And I believe the week after that is the Planning Committee meeting and the Finance and Administration Committee meeting. And then speaking of the North Bay Water Reuse Authority, I saw that their board meeting will be on the 28th of this month.
Great. Thank you.
That's
That-
all I have.
And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No.